The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hello everyone, I'm Debra Hutchison in the Rogers TV studio, and this is your COVID-19 local update. The United Way of Durham region has always been there to extend a helping hand to those in need, and now that we are experiencing a pandemic, the demand on the United Way is greater than ever. Here to talk about that is Robert Howard. His official title is Chief Possibility Officer. I love that title, Robert. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Deborah. There's a long story behind that title, and I don't want to get into that here. But you do a great job, and we all enjoy listening to you. And I think the service that you provide in the community is wonderful, and it's a real opportunity. We're pleased to be having an opportunity to talk to people today.
Well, back at you there, sir. You've had a lot to deal with during this pandemic, as has everyone, but let's talk about the increase in demand on the services that you provide. At times, it must seem absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, our heart goes out and our thoughts are with all the people in the community who are experiencing this. There's no question. This is a transformational and a transcendent moment. If you think back to March 17th, I remember that date because it wasn't March 17th St. Patrick's Day. It's also, I can't ever forget that date because it's the birthday of our CEO. And she reminds me that it was on that date. I think that they closed down the schools and that during March break, they announced that they would not be reopening the schools until April. And I think nobody was really quite certain at that time what the duration of this would be, what it would look like. All of a sudden, April 1st became May 1st, and then there was a dialogue around, would the school year be shut down? And then all of a sudden, what does it look like in September? And of course now, all of a sudden, where did Labor Day go? We're sitting here in, the middle of October practically. And it's been transformational, no question about it. I don't think there's a single person. I think when this thing started, people would have said, it may not impact me. And if you have a job and if you're capable of working from home and if your income stream is reasonably secure, certainly there are inconveniences in terms of groceries and getting out and et cetera. But it has materially had impact, and we see that every day with our agencies and with the programs that we support. And you're absolutely correct. It's interesting that from the very early stages of this thing, it revealed some cracks, and it has been informational for us as an organization, and I think as a community, and I think as governments, that we've said, okay, we are interconnected in a way that we would never have envisioned a couple of years ago or even a couple of months before COVID, that the least amongst us, the most vulnerable amongst us, if their health issues and their inability to operate in the community can impact family businesses. We've seen people burn through savings. We've seen families who've had businesses for 20, 25, generational businesses go out of business. So the impact has been severe, no question about it.
Let's talk about the Emergency Community Support Fund, a government support fund to help charities and the most vulnerable. How is the United Way of Durham region involved?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the governments, and it's not a question of partisanship, whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, the Emergency Community Support Fund is a program of the federal government, and money was made available to us. And it was, there was a couple of things about it. The first tranche of funding was in Durham region was a little bit in excess of $1.5 million, $1.6 million through the United Way. And the second amount of funding, which we have just recently announced, is $678,750. So in total, it's about $2.2 million, $2.25 million. And the instruction was very clear that it was to assist the most vulnerable in the community with the harshest impacts of the virus. And I think there were a number of things which came out of that, which again were very instructive, and which we saw some of the cracks. And at the very early stages of this thing, certainly one of the cracks was the vulnerability in food precarity. And a lot of the funding was directed at asymmetrical kind of supply chains to get food to people who were inbound, housebound, afraid to go out, not able to go out because of health insecurities. There was a change, a very rapid change that took place in the availability of volunteers who would previously deliver food. So funding had to be provided in some instances to, pay for gasoline for drivers, to pay different insurance even with some of the agencies, because what previously had been arranged for could not be done in early COVID stages. In addition to that, there was a lot of funding which was made available to things like enhancements in tech, so that whether it's big brothers and big sisters and the communication between bigs and littles, which is no less important during a pandemic than it was before, or indeed will be after, or the connectedness that seniors felt in terms of outreach to them, and that all of a sudden had to be done on an iPad, and that funding helped to make that available. And
so how does this work then? So you were given this government funding, and then community groups then applied to you for
Correct.
a piece of that pie, and then you decide who gets the money and who gets how much.
Correct. The ECSF funding was the first tranche. Of VCSF funding was made available to United Way Centraide Canada, the community foundations, and the Red Cross. And I think the government made, in my opinion, that was a very responsible decision, because I think all three organizations have deep roots in the community. I can't speak for the community foundations and the Red Cross. I can speak for the United Way in Durham region, and I can tell you that we had wonderful cooperation from the region. We had wonderful cooperation from our community and agency partners, so that we could make an absolute, unequivocal commitment to the taxpayers who provided this funding, that said these dollars are going to people in the most vulnerable circumstances to mitigate the harshest impacts of this virus. And in so doing, not only do you improve the quality of life of the individuals affected, but you provide a stability to the society, that you get food to housebound seniors. You continue to support programming that allows children to have a sense of normalcy in their lives, that you help families in crisis. You understand at the very early stages of this thing, I don't think people fully knew, quite frankly, without being pejorative, precisely what the consequences would be on mental health impacts, on kids. Kids can be very resilient, and sometimes they can hide it. But we knew that there was an increase in family violence. We knew there was an increase in violence in the home against and abuse in children. So there was assistance in those areas as well. And it was such a large task. And that's why the second round, I think, has just been announced and just been released. And the United Way is taking applications once again. And it's available to any not-for-profit or qualified donee in Durham region, and we encourage you to apply both to us or to the Community Foundation in Durham region. And I can tell you the money will be well invested and well spent to assist those most vulnerable.
So if people want to apply, that runs until, is it the end of October?
I think it's the end of October. I think yes, it's the end of October in this round, and the application process is on our website. Some frequently asked questions are on there, and the process, and there's a direct contact information piece. Her name is Barbara Fannin. She does a wonderful job working, and she knows the agencies, she knows the program. In my opinion, she has a wonderful overview of the need in the community. She has a wonderful network of people with whom she connects and can contact with, and I mean, I could tell you a number of stories about how just knowing some of what was known and developed over the last 5 or 7 or 10 years in terms of, you could short circuit a request or a need simply by providing air conditioning in a van because somebody needed to deliver food, but part of the holdup, the blockage in the food delivery was the van was broken and they needed to get an air-conditioned van, and somebody said, well, why don't you just put air conditioning in that van? And all of a sudden we could do that. And those kinds of things are made possible when you work at the local level, when you empower local people, when you have local knowledge. And I'd say the system worked very, very well.
And you did it in such quick fashion. I think pivot is that catchphrase that we're hearing throughout COVID. You really did, turn the bus around, pivot, and we've had many discussions on, there was rapid deployment. That doesn't usually happen with government.
I don't want to be critical of government. I don't want to be critical of any bureaucracy, whether it's the major corporations or the public sector, private sector. What I could say, and you're absolutely correct, you're very prescient, Deborah, that I think, but I'm pretty damn close. I'm pretty damn sure that it's pretty close to the number. The program was announced first time around in the middle of May. I want to say May 17th. It could have been May 15th. Don't hold me to it. By the end of July, decisions were made. So between May 15th or May 17th and the end of July, that's 10 weeks. The program's announced. Applications were received, solicited, received, adjudicated, and by the middle of August, the money was in the hands of agencies and program people providing relief to the most vulnerable in this community. Think about that. Let that sink in for people. That you have a program, you announce a program, a couple $100 million. United Way of Canada, and in our community, it was the United Way of Durham region through the United Way of Canada, community foundations, Red Cross, and the program's announced in the middle of May, and by July 31st, that's 10 weeks, give or take, a day or two, the agencies and programs are notified that funding has been approved, and the money is in somebody's bank account, in the program bank account, whether it's to deliver food, or it's to purchase food, or it's to assist in getting drivers, or it's to assist in getting technology, whether it's the Pickering Library that had to do some of their programming online and with video enhancement, whether it's Ontario Shores who got funding through that program that would allow people to have connectedness to some of their clients that they couldn't physically be present with during the early stages of the pandemic. That was done in 12 weeks, May 15, May, June, July, August, about 12 weeks.
Okay, Rob, I'm going to have to stop you there. We're going to have to go to a quick break. Stay with us. More of our conversation with Robert Howard from the United Way of Durham region after this.
Thank you, ma'am.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., it's the RTV Quiz. Giovanni Petiti hosts a weekly trivia competition that lets you play from the comfort of your couch. Play along at home and challenge your friends. And don't forget to follow along on social media. Let us know who's top of trivia, and you can find yourself featured on a future episode.
Are you kidding me, folks?
The RTV Quiz, Wednesday nights at 7:30 p.m. on Rogers TV or at rogerstv.com/RTV Quiz.
And welcome back to Local Update. Our guest this week is Robert Howard from the United Way of Durham Region. Bob, when we left, we were talking about the ECSF fund and all the vulnerable sections of the community that you'd helped. I'm sure there are some stories that really some success stories that really resonate with you, and it's important to note that not all of the groups that received this funding through the ECSF were United Way agencies.
That's exactly correct, Deborah. I think it's an important point to make that the ECSF funding in round 1 and round 2 is not only for United Way agencies. There are a number of community organizations which received funding, which were not United Way agencies. And during the pandemic, and one of the impacts of the pandemic, as you had a huge surge in need, you had a number of organizations which sprung up organically within the community, which I think is a great thing. And one of those, for example, would be something like the Canadian Hope for Africa project, which I think is in Pickering. I'm not 100% certain of that. But it's an organization that received ECSF funding, and it's something that, you'd say they support vulnerable African Congolese seniors and children in the Durham region. And all of a sudden, these people were serving Congolese seniors and refugees and immigrants who were in need of assistance, and the need was exacerbated during COVID and laid more bare and more prescient. And it's the kind of thing that we were able to do with this kind of funding. And it has happened all over the place. And I think it's an important point. Whether it was the backdoor mission, there was also funding. The Alzheimer's Society of Durham Region, which is not a United Way funded agency and program year-round, needed money. I think they got something north of $40,000 for transitioning client and caregiving support to virtual platforms.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing that we did a great deal of. And we saw it in the Alzheimer's Society. We saw it in Big Sisters and Big Brothers all across the region. And Big Sisters would be, Big Sisters and Big Brothers and Big Sisters would be a United Way agency, and we fund them all across, and we're quite proud of that relationship and partnership we have. But all of a sudden it became evident that they needed assistance because for very, very, very similar. For example, in Southwest Durham, the Little Studio is a virtual art-based group mentorship program for 9 to 14-year-old youth, which they do, and they needed assistance to make that program a virtual program. And that's exactly the kind of funding that, when the federal government came along with ECSF and said the funding should be directed to those organizations who are providing specific relief as a cause, which was caused or exacerbated by the impacts of the virus. And that's one of the things our allocations committee was able to do, and one of the things that our board was able to approve. And it's, I think, one of the great strengths of the United Way, not only in Durham region, but across the country, that you have an integrated network of programs and agencies that can see where money can be invested with the greatest impact. And you have material impact and you have sustainable impact. And it's not simply a question of helping people 1 time off or 2 time off, but if you're really going to do something about changing the trajectory of the life of somebody less advantaged, it's got to be material and it's got to be sustainable. And we were able to do that.
I have to ask you, the question has been asked, and it's on your frequently asked questions, and I think it's a good one. Why should someone continue to donate to the United Way if you're receiving all this federal funding to then, funnel into organizations that really need it?
I think that's a good question. It's a question that obviously comes into people's minds. There's a couple of answers to that question. The cleanest and most obvious answer is the ECSF funding stops at the end of March in 2021. The money is expended, it's out the door, it's expended, and all of a sudden, if the assistance that we're able to provide after March 31st is going to be a function of our capacity with local donors to assist and to continue the work. The second thing I would point out is that the government money, the ECSF funding, I think was really intended to blunt, and wisely so, from an economic standpoint and a social standpoint, the harshest impacts of the immediacy of the virus when it hit. And there was a huge surge, whether it's 30 or 300% increase in food bank usage in the month of June. You know, that as people began to burn through, you could almost see it. There was a burning through of savings as the first levels of unemployment hit. And all of a sudden, you had a 30% increase in food bank usage. There was one figure that came out across the GTA that in the month of June, year over year, there had been a 300% increase in food bank usage. And the surge in need, in my opinion, was wisely blunted by the availability of the ECSF funding. What's going to happen on a year-round basis is that if we're going to continue to change the trajectory of people's lives, if we're going to continue to take people out of poverty, and if we're going to continue to assist, and not only on a humanitarian basis, not only because it's a nice thing to do, but because from an economic standpoint, it's an essential thing to do, that you have more and more people participating in the economy more fully. You assist young kids to get better grades in school, to go through school, to contribute on the other end of the equation. You help to relieve the anxiety and the pressure and the social isolation and loneliness of seniors. You don't just do that because there's a pandemic. You do that, period, full-time, year-round. And that's what the United Way does.
Okay. And that is a challenge for you at any time, you know, reaching out to people and getting those donations. But when you're in the middle of a pandemic as well, you know, people who perhaps could afford to donate, they're holding stuff back too because there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, Deborah. I mean, you and I could sit here and we could have a long chat for a long time. And it's wonderful to talk to you because you ask the kinds of questions that I think need to be asked in this community. The people are using social services that used to be our donors. You know, there was a figure that I saw the other day of an almost doubling in the increase of people with university educations and university degrees who are using food banks. And I know personally of two people who used to work on our campaign, used to work in organizations in Durham region, who were campaigners. They were volunteers. We have about 700 volunteers who work for us throughout the year. And one of them I got an email from was using a food bank, first time ever. You know, and she said, Robert, it never would have occurred to me that I would be sitting here, you know, encouraging my colleagues 2 years ago to give $4 or $5 a week on payroll deduction to the United Way for this social architecture of support. And all of a sudden, she's using a food bank.
Yeah.
You know, I got emails in my inbox because my email, when you contact us on our website, for better or worse, it's to my email. Right. And some people have said, oh, you should have an information general email or blah, blah, blah. And I've resisted that, even though I get some garbage in my inbox. That's true, too. But I also get people from an email from a woman who said to me, you know, Robert, I haven't eaten in 4 days. She's a senior. She's on assistance. She is predeceased by a spouse. Her family does not live in the community. And I can tell you very frankly, there's no question in my mind, from a social standpoint, she was in very desperate straits, you know? And that's where our staff, probably outside of procedures and protocols, got with two of our agencies and said, and they wound up delivering food to this woman, and that's what we do. And we do a lot of work in terms of the process architecture and setting up, because it really can't be episodic and it really can't be one-off. But the truth of the matter is, who the heck could be critical of one of our staff members making a personal phone call to a food bank to assist somebody in navigating the system, and then all of a sudden using their personal car to drive up to this person's door and leave some food outside, let them know they came out, no contact, distanced, etc. And here's a person, it blows you away when you actually hear some of it and see some of it. And I've heard a whole lot of it, and I've seen a whole lot of it, as I'm sure a lot of our agencies and program people do.
They're telling me we only have 3 minutes left, so a couple of other things I want to talk about as well. And this story really got me. When you were talking about your Operation Backpack, every year as school begins, you collect backpacks, get backpacks filled for kids that need it. But there's one story that really touched me, and I want to give you that opportunity to tell that story.
Yeah, it's an absolutely true story, and it's happened to us twice in the last 3 years. The last time was one of my colleagues, and it was this past September, and it was the first time it had happened to her. And we do a program, and we use our existing community partners, so there's no duplication, there's no overlap. We hand out a couple thousand backpacks and assisting families who are most in need, to you or me, would sit there and there's excitement around the new school year and everybody goes out. Well, to a single parent, mother or wife, mother or father, a single parent, maybe one kid, maybe two kids, all of a sudden it becomes an onerous task. Mm-hmm. And you say, oh man, how am I going to get $100 or $50 or $150? I've got to buy, fall clothing, et cetera, et cetera. If we can remove some of the uncertainty and the burden in that person's life, with something as simple as some educational supplies, because we know educational supplies early on in life do play a role in helping that kid develop a positive attitude towards learning, et cetera, all of that good stuff. And my colleague who told this story and told me of this story had a situation where a person had contacted us individually and said, outside of the normal process, and said, excuse me, can my child register for backpack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we were late and they were late and school had started, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it was, well, what's your address? We can drop it off. Similarly to the story with the senior, we can drop it off. We can get it to you, because that's what our staff kind of do. And they shouldn't do it, but that's beside the point. We can talk about that later. And what she did, she couldn't get an answer about, where you live and whatever. Long story short, it turned out this person was living in a car in a parking lot in South Oshawa. That it wasn't a question of, you can drop my back off, my two backpacks for my kids at ABC, South Street, and whatever. No, she was living in a car, and it became obvious when she walked up and had two backpacks and said, here's a person living in a car in 2020 in Canada.
In a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic, correct. And it hit home that even though a lot of people would say to us, we're all in this equally, and I understand that, or we're all in this together. We're not all in this equally. Okay. And there are a whole lot of people out there who are on the edges and the margins and are really vulnerable.
Robert, I'm going to have to stop you there. We are out of time. I can't thank you enough. We'll have to have you back. And to our viewers, thanks for joining us. Until next time, I'm Debra Hutchison. Stay safe, everyone.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.